By the end of day 2, Flammable Freddy had become a decent looking, fun playing game with unlockable upgrades from obtaining a high enough score. What's left to do? Why, to add levels of course. Ever since Dirac and Error Mine in 2004, I've known that I've hated making levels for games. I love making the engine, I love deciding on how the guns will work and how the AI will chase you and all that stuff. But when all that's done and I know what the game's going to be like, and all that's left is just the simple, easy process of adding levels, my interest suddenly falls off a cliff. Creating new environments for your player to explore is a much longer and far more tedious job than you'd expect it to be. In the past, I've blamed that on boring gameplay, when more levels serve as being simply differently shaped rooms for your characters to fight through, and all I have to do is to decide where to place the enemies and health. That's boring. The first game of mine I enjoyed making levels for was Impossible Mission, a puzzle game that won an earlier competition over on the Daily Click. The site's admin, Rickus, sent me this handwritten congratulations letter and a USB stick containing all of the greatest games ever made on Click products, which has been a really nice resource to have. And the reason making levels for Impossible Mission was different and fun was because that game had gameplay. Before then, I thought gameplay comprised of more enemies in every room you encountered, but actually, a finely crafted puzzle game containing unique gameplay elements that can be combined in unique ways proved to be a lot more fun to make levels for. And I really enjoyed the devious process of devising new challenges for the player to fight through. Destruction Terrorist was the same. I had no problem adding more levels to that game because playing through them afterwards was a joy, instead of being just a job. Destruction Terrorist 2 has over 100 levels made, by the way. The only generic shooty game of mine I've bothered making lots of levels for is Deathgiver 2. The engine itself was done in a day, yet it took over half a year to finally get the levels done for it because it was such a boring and time-consuming process. I'm very happy I forced myself to do it though, as it would have been a real shame had that game never been made, and had the world never been exposed to that game's excellent writing and storyline.
I had escaped from the deserts, and I'm going to the enemy's base, but
Looking back at that, what a shame it is that I invested so much time making levels for a game that had been so primitive in nature. All that work for a game engine that took about a day to make the core gameplay for. What if I had got one of my mega projects and decided to make levels for that instead? Dirac and Error Mine with 10 levels, or Dirac and Error Mine 2 with 5 levels. Back then, much good work was lost for the lack of a little more. But Flammable Freddy wasn't to suffer the same fate. It helped that I knew this game didn't require that many levels. It was all about mastering and replaying the levels which did exist, so I knew it was better to make fewer but more fun levels, rather than for there to be dozens of samey, boring levels that the player had to force themselves to grind through. By sticking to fewer levels, I could dedicate the time required to make each level feel unique, by giving them a custom theme and textures, and for there to be new gameplay elements to each. For level 2, I made it a desert theme, and added a new object in the form of a Destruction Darius 2 banner. Burning this would reward the player 400 points, more than anything else in the game. There's even an achievement if you manage to destroy all trace of Destruction Darius 2 in a single playthrough. A sly poke at how the project has been stuck in late development hell, and I want people to forget about it all. For now. For level 3, I chose a snowy theme and mixed the gameplay up by making it full of tiny islands that you'd have to hop between. I left a few bridges near the beginning for less confident players to still rack up decent points from, but for the best, you need to go island hopping. I don't know how successful this level was. I found that I would discover a decent path and then would stick to it, so this level has fewer choices than the rest of them do in my opinion. And I sprinkled snow onto everything here, one of the perks of making each level individually, functioning separately from the others. And for the final, level 4, I set about making my dream for this game into a reality, by programming in dozens of NPCs, just waiting to be set alight. But I had to be careful with this. One of the requirements for this competition is that the gameplay is repeatable and skill-based, which dozens of NPCs wandering about all over the place may somewhat work against. So I designed them with a few rules in mind. They don't move unless you touch them, then once you do, they begin running directly away from you. So although difficult, with practice you can get them all to behave exactly the same way every time. Consistency like this is the bane of my life. Destruction Darius 2 with its splinters and boulders flying everywhere, and CSGO with its weapon inaccuracy. There's been a long-raging debate over whether these slightly random mechanics can be deemed to be skillful. Because while the player will never be able to control these random things, they can learn to live with them and to tailor their playstyle around them to make them work most in their favour, which itself is kind of skillful. And possibly even more so than if every bullet just goes exactly where your crosshair is. But like I said, it is a topic of great debate. There was a bug I discovered where these NPCs would detonate barrels, even if the people weren't yet on fire. I briefly investigated this, but couldn't figure out an obvious reason to why this was happening. So what should I do? Should I invest an unknown amount of time into figuring it out, and to fix this bug properly? Or, since it's just for one level, should I just place the NPCs far enough away from the barrels to prevent auto-detonation in the first place? I opted for the latter, because in my mind, the development of this game has gone past the stage of being about building solid foundations. It's now the end game, where all I'm doing is applying the final touches to it. And with no future development time being dependent on these NPCs, I opted for a botch instead. It's something that I'm aware I've done, and I know it's a weak spot of the game that could come back to haunt me should I ever revisit it and decide to extend it to 5, 6 or 100 levels in length instead. But given what Flammable Freddy is, it doesn't matter in the slightest. I mention this botch because these messy shortcuts do have a place in game development, and once you're experienced enough with it, you learn where you can get away with using them, and where they won't come back to haunt you and to waste your time later on. For this fourth and final level, to keep the gameplay fresh, I turned the idea of the game on its head. What if, instead of it being lots of islands surrounded by water, it was instead a large inland level with just a few bits of water dotted about instead? This was more like my initial idea for this game, where it forced players to watch the clock carefully and to ensure that they left enough time to extinguish themselves before the time ran out. There's just one problem with this. Since it's the last level of the campaign, it doesn't matter whether the player lives or dies, so this was an epic fail on my part. So I added a 1000-point bonus for simply surviving a level, which fixes the issue with the last level, but then causes problems elsewhere. 1000 is quite a lot of points, meaning that the bulk of your first playthrough's high score will comprise of this survival reward, which in a way undermines the value of the other points that you can earn. But at the same time, if you earn a high score, it's assumed that you're going to survive at least 3 of these 4 levels, so it's on you whether you want that last 1000-point bonus or not. Because it could be that you might think you could earn more than 1000 points by dying, but by spending those last few seconds alive igniting all those barrels in the corner of the map instead. The first time I playtested this level, I accidentally left one of the NPCs hovering in the air, and I found it so funny that they instantly plummeted into the water below that I kept it in. It also helps show other players that you'll gain points by forcing NPCs to leap into the water. But doing this does mean that, even if you do nothing other than survive all 4 rounds, your character will still earn a high score of 4,200 points. 4,200 talentless, wasted high score points, partially devaluing any high score you earn on top of that. This isn't my favourite aspect of the game, but I'm sure it's just something that I'm aware of that other players don't care about in the slightest. I initially planned to have a boss battle against Inflammable Ivan, who would be exactly like Flammable Freddy, and it would be the 2 of you running about the level trying to set the most stuff on fire. But it didn't gel with the rest of the gameplay, and I didn't have enough time to add this in, so that had to be cut from the game, because I decided that having flammable NPCs was an easier and more rewarding element to feature instead. But if I ever do make a sequel to Flammable Freddy, a battle against Inflammable Ivan could find a place, possibly serving as a whole new game mode or something like that. It could even pave the way for a 2-player mode. For the second half of day 3, I gave the game to friends to playtest, and watched them stream it for the first time, and I was making notes as it went, to see how they played the game, how soon they understood the burning and water features, and whether or not they got enough points to earn an upgrade, and if so, if they even understood how to upgrade stuff. It's at this point I changed the value of the scores and added more bushes in clumps around the level, because there's no point in setting a single 50-point bush on fire, but watching a small forest of them burning is quite rewarding and adds quite a lot to your score even when you're busy elsewhere igniting barrels and bridges instead. It was on this 3rd day that I added health bars to everything so that players could see at a glance how close things were to igniting, though I think some players in playtesting just assumed this was a sign that they were already burning and represented how long they would burn for or something like that. But I was all like screw it and left it at that because I couldn't think of how to make it any more obvious. I also rejigged the value of stuff based on how the different props felt to destroy in testing. I also had to consider the weighting of the levels. Of course, surviving the level is worth more than just the 1000-point bonus it gives you. It opens up a whole extra level for you to gain points on as well. It's expected that players will reach level 4 if they're aiming to get a new high score. This being part 4 of this video series, I have the benefit of being able to read what you've all been saying in earlier episodes. First of all, I think I upset some artists by saying that art wasn't important. And that was unfair. I want to make it clear that I have a lot of respect for graphics in games, and admiration for the talented and patient artists who work on them. I know a great guy who's always showing me mock-ups of my games that he's made using the art styles that he's currently messing about with, and it puts my work to shame. I want to collaborate with him to release fun, pretty looking games at some point in the future. So I like art and I respect it, but I believe gameplay should always take priority over the graphics, wherever those two things meet. A game about fire everywhere could very easily have become a mess to look at and difficult to read, which was why my emphasis in the last video was on keeping the game readable, even if it meant sacrificing the billowing smoke clouds and toning down the fire effects everywhere. I was just trying to make the point that while graphics is all nice and all, I don't think it should ever be to the detriment of the gameplay. I've also received the usual old comments from people saying that I should be using different game making tools, and about how much I'm being held back by what I'm currently using. If you're saying this as a genuine naive suggestion, then thanks, but no thanks. However, normally this sort of thing is said because they're spoiling for an argument about which programming language is the best. I swear game development is the worst for breeding this kind of fanatic. You know who you are, so I'll make it very simple. I am not going to change the tools that I use. Here I am, having made a game that I'm happy with, in just a couple of days, using tools that I enjoy working with and have mastery in. The last thing I need is a change of tools, so when people try to argue this with me, I can only see them as being offensively dismissive of my own approaches and achievements in game development. The argument ultimately boils down to, yes, I know Unity or the Unreal Engine or C++ is way more powerful than Fusion 2.5. But I have mastery in my game maker, and can make what I want to do with it, and extremely efficiently. Any attempt to argue further with me about this is done in bad faith. Another more interesting suggestion that I got was that I should have got Flammable Freddy playtested by other people earlier in its development than I did. Guess what I'm going to say to that? No. If I had infinite friends and infinite time to make this game, then yes, I probably would have got a few people to test it earlier than I did. But my friends are finite in number. Very finite in number, and I'm not going to waste their first playtesting on an early build which in no way resembles the final product. Up to a certain stage of development, I think I am a talented enough game developer to be able to critique my own creation, and to get it to a somewhat playable stage before having others test it. Before this point, playtesting is more about obvious bug fixing and the broader brushstrokes, which I am already aware of and will be capable of doing on my own without the input from others. I don't want for early playtesters to be distracted by these things, which they will be with an alpha product. I want to get the game to a stage where playtesters can focus on the feel of the finished game, and on the balance of the gameplay. The one thing I can't do as the game's developer is to experience what it's like for a new player to try it for the first time. That's the most valuable thing that playtesters can do for me at this point in development, and they wouldn't be able to do this if they already had prior experience with the game. So that's why I leave it to a relatively late stage before getting other people to try my game for the first time. If, when they finally play it, they all decide that the game's rubbish and I should change it all, then fair enough, I've left it too long before playtesting it and my game is going to be a failure. I'll be honest, if the game turns out to be terrible, then it's on me for having made a bad game. With a project of this length, all I can expect from playtesters is for them to help point out the problems that players will have on their first, second or third playthroughs of the game, and to tell me what they think would make these first experiences more enjoyable or intuitive. At the end of the day, it's on me to have created a game that's got enough depth to it to justify a fourth playthrough. Here's my last lesson for you. If you're planning to make a game, don't let it outstay its welcome. If anything, you should make it shorter than players want it to be, so they voluntarily choose to replay it. I have made many songs, yet it's the newer ones I skip through the most, just because they're longer. My first songs were very simple, very basic, but they're short enough that they end before I tire of them. And I've decided that I should be making games in the same way. I used to think that every game had to try and be the best game ever, worthy of dozens of hours of playing. I bloat those games with features and stuff, believing that more is better, a bit like Cyberpunk did. But now I don't see it that way. It's far better for a game to be short and sweet, to be happy being what it is instead of chasing something that it isn't. And something needs to fill those gaps in your life between those sprawling, epic games that will consume hundreds of hours of your lifetime. So I set out to make Flammable Freddy exactly that, a stopgap that's merely a handful of seconds long. My challenge was to ensure that players would want to experience those few seconds several times. Optionally. Voluntarily. So that's the secret to Flammable Freddy's success. It aims for not much of your time in the hope that you'll want to replay it several times. And I think it succeeds in doing that. For long enough, perhaps, that the short-term appeal of setting fire to stuff can last for long enough to ignite the longer-term goals like achieving a high score, or in becoming a diamond, and thus completing the campaign. If Flammable Freddy does this, then it's been a success, even if it pales in comparison to the ambition that I had for my earlier games. The third day of development was over, and I had a finished game. But There's one more video in this series, because I found myself in the enviable position of having a finished game several days before the competition for it ends. What is this madness? This should never happen. With game development, there's always meant to be a horrible crunch time right up until the clock strikes midnight on the final day. Whatever will I do, having reached this several days sooner than I should have done? Find out next time.